How are you keeping? We'll try again with a video. I've been trying to make this video just to tell a wee bit about my life and about the struggles that I've had and how I've tried to cope and bounce back from them, and just the video keeps going wrong because my cameras are overheating and I probably don't have the right setup, but we do try. I'm Jamie Hamilton. I'm 32 now. I'm from Ballyclare in Northern Ireland, and I had a very serious motorbike crash down in Mantee in 2015, and I've had some other things happen in my life that I just thought that if I told my story, maybe it might try and help. If I could help one more person, and that would be amazing. So hopefully I'll just tell you what goes on, and hopefully if I can help anybody, that would be amazing. So I played football as a young child. I absolutely loved football, and whenever I started playing, I was probably I was right young, was maybe like 5, and then whenever I started playing, I just went right up through the ranks, and I actually played for a team called Leicester City and Bolton Wanderers, an English Premiership team, but I was only in the age group of 9 or 10, and going away and playing in tournaments wasn't really my thing. I was probably a bit of a home bird, and I didn't like going away and having to spend so much time away from home. And I always think that I wasn't an awesome football player. I was a very good football player, but I just wasn't incredible. And I believe in that sport is so competitive, and I think you have to be amazing to ever make it in the sport. So I probably was never going to make it. And then the big turnaround was my father actually went to prison for fighting. I was only 10 at the time, and my dad went to prison for a few years for fighting, and I always knew my dad was a fighter, and my dad had a massive name for it, but I suppose I had big dreams that I wanted to have a big name as well, but just not for the same reasons. I want to do good in the world, and I still do want to do good in the world, and I want to have a big name, but just for good reasons. And I suppose that is what has given me so much drive and determination in my life. So whenever my dad went to prison, my mum moved us away to a different town, and I always wanted a motorbike, so my mum bought me a motorcycle. And funny, the guy that actually taught me how to ride the bike was a guy called Harry Corbett, and he taught me, and he had 2 kids of his own, but they just weren't that interested in riding themselves, and they were more interested in working on the bikes and being involved. So he probably took me on, and he was a bit of a father figure to me, and took me right the whole way up through the ranks. So he always believed, he was a past racer himself, and he believed to make it in motorcycling you had to go to England, to the mainland, to race. And we went to England and went right up through the ranks, and Harry didn't have a lot of money either, and we were trying to beg and borrow to go racing. And
the meeting was particularly memorable for Jamie Hamilton, who aged just 14 won 5 of the races. 2-stroke must run in the blood of Jamie Hamilton's family. Uncle Gary Cowan was British 250cc champion in 1987 before he went on to race in the Grand Prix circuit. Now Jamie, barely a teenager, has shown he too has the talent to make it in the big time. 5 wins, including 2 in the Young Guns handicap race, all in a day's work for the 14-year-old.
I'm really enjoying this championship, and I didn't think I was going to win the 125 class, but I went out and just tried my best and I won it, and I was very happy about that. So I just tried to do that in the next race. I'd love to become a world championship, but it's all hard work and hard training.
One for the future.
We have so many stories about using red diesel, which isn't allowed here in Northern Ireland, and using it to try and go racing and being caught and getting the fines for the diesel, and there's so many different stories that I could tell on that time in my life. And to be honest, it was an experience I'm glad that I experienced, and I'm glad that I'm out the other side of, and we didn't get in any trouble, and we never done any badness. It was just trying to bend the rules probably to be able to afford to go racing. And there's probably a lot of people out there that's in the same boat, that's had to bend rules just to be able to go and do the things that they dream of. Harry took me right the way through my career till 2009. we were racing and we had no money. So at the start of the season, we had no money. We actually sat out at round 1, didn't bother going to round 1 at all, and then for round 2 we got the lend of a bike that wasn't competitive at all, and I qualified 32nd and I finished 14th in the race, which I was far better than that. And I was just very lucky that there was a team called Gearlink Kawasaki that had took the rider they had took on for that season wasn't qualifying but was blaming the bike, and he rung and asked would I be interested in maybe riding their bike so he could find out whether the bike was at fault or whether the rider wasn't fast enough. And he gave me a go on it, and for round 3 at Donington Park, and I got straight on and went pole position and won the race. And then he couldn't throw me off the bike, and he had no option. We had no money at the time, but we bought some cars at the auction in Ballyclare during that winter, and we kept selling off the cars and to try and get the money to go racing. And it just, I went on that much of a streak of riding well, and my confidence was high, and they couldn't get me off the podium till, from really only the championship starting at round 3, I actually won the championship with 1 round remaining because I was so consistent and at the front, and I was never off the podium. And I only had 2 wins that year, but it was my consistency of always being on the podium was what stood by me, and I won the championship. But this is probably was the start of another downfall that I had. We went into a big massive American motorhome, and we were looking for teams to ride for the following season. And I remember going into a big motorhome and of this successful team and hoping that I could maybe ride for them in the future. And when we went in, they asked for £90,000. Now, bearing in mind, it was just me and my mum at the time, and we had no money, and the house that we were living on was worth £60,000. So even if we had sold the house that we lived in, there was still a £30,000 deficit, and the house where we lived on had a mortgage on it. So it definitely wasn't feasible. And I remember Harry was beside me, and I remember we both laughed and just got up and walked out because we knew this was never going to be possible. And the following season we just got the lend of a motorbike off a team, and I rode it, but I wasn't very competitive at all. And it was a very hard time in my life because I believed that I was the best, and I believed that I was going to make it in motorbike racing. And I always just, I suppose, being young, I just believed that it was all going to be grand and merry. And I was I believed that I was the best in age group of 16-25. I'd proved that. I'd won championships, and now nobody was taking me on for the future, and I couldn't. It was hard work. And at the end of the following season, I actually ended up parting ways with Harry, and I decided to go and try and do it myself. And there was another rider called Glenn Irwin that was coming behind me, but he had a lot more support behind him, and I sort of hoped that if I come back to Ireland and raced, I would be able to get that support myself. So whenever I come back to Ireland, I decided to do the Northwest 200, which would be my first ever road race, which on a proper public road, and I'd never done it, and I always probably was drummed into me from I was young about how dangerous it was, and that I should probably never try. But I suppose coming from Northern Ireland is the home of racing, and it's the home of road racing, and I suppose I always had this in the back of my head that I would like to try. And when I went to that first road race at the Northwest, I fell in love with the sport. The fact that you could drive up on the road that morning with all the cars and just be a normal public road, and then you come into the paddock and they close the roads and you go back out on your racing motorbike, and there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of people leaning over the hedge cheering me on, was incredible. Everybody that I went to school with, basically everybody I known, was always go and watch the Northwest 200, and it's such a big sporting event. And people I went to school with coming up and asking me for my autograph was incredible. It was such a weird feeling. I fell in love with the sport there and then, and I've been to the Northwest every year since I've been born myself, and to feel like I was now part of it was an incredible feeling. And I knew that road racing was going to be the direction I was going to go from then on. And I got in touch with Ryan Farquhar, who's the most successful road racer ever. He's won the most amount of races between Ireland and the Isle TT, and he runs a very successful team. And I got in touch with him, and he was very interested, given my pedigree, that I go racing for him. And whenever we were doing the deal, he actually said that, Jimmy, what happens if you crash the bike? I need the crash damage covered. And we had no money. I had no money. I was working just a 9-to-5 job, and I was only getting minimum wage every week, and it wasn't enough. He was looking £9,000, and I just couldn't cover it. So I actually managed to get like four or five sponsors, I think it was, and they all each put £1,000 in each. And for the rest of the money, then I went to my bank and I took a bank loan out. So I was able to go to Ryan with these sponsors that I had wrote letters to say that they would cover the cost if I crashed, and took my bank statement and showed them that the balance in the bank was able to cover the cost of racing, and away I went. I got started, and I never looked back. Them times with Ryan over the next 2.5 years that I spent with Ryan was incredible. I ended up changing work till I'd done a 3-day week in work, and I left work on a Wednesday and travelled to Ryan's house, and we worked at the bikes on a Wednesday evening and all day Thursday, and then went straight to the racetrack, and it was some of the best times in life. I managed to buy a race lorry. After about a year, I bought a race lorry, and I remember then got a Thursday night working at the bikes, and as soon as it was over, then we had put everything into the race lorry and travelled to the racetrack and done all the road races in Ireland. We done the Northwest 200, the Isle TT, and we done them all, and I even done Macau Grand Prix and just off China. And it was a class for a wee guy from Ballyclare that was travelling halfway around the world to race motorbikes, and them covering the cost was an incredible feeling, and made me very proud. That it was some of the most great times that I had in life, because I went from racing British Championship and always being in the mindset that I always had to be so dedicated, and always I wasn't allowed to drink. I never drank once whenever I was racing. I was always very dedicated, and I trained hard, and I done everything right. And whenever I went to race for Ryan taught me that I could enjoy myself, and I could still go racing and enjoy myself. And I remember going to Ryan's, and we had a couple of drinks on a Wednesday night, and then by the Friday for practice day we were good to go again. And I think trying to find a balance of when to be professional and when to let the hair down was incredible. And it was probably a mistake. I ended up leaving Ryan in 2014, and I always had dreams for being bigger and better, and I believed that I needed to move to try and forward my career. And I moved to a team that it had been successful in the past, but when I turned up to ride for the team, it turned out that I was going to be the only person that was there to run the team, and it was a very difficult season in 2014, and I went and done all the races. Now I'd already won the Ulster and Irish Championship. I was like finishing on the podium at the Northwest till in 2014 my results took a backward step, and it was to do with just not having the machinery below me. And I suppose then for the following year in 2015, my main aim was to try and get back on something competitive, and with a team structure around me that looked after me and made me feel good. And I got in contact with a man called John Burrows, who owns the Cookstown Burrows engineering team in Northern Ireland, and I got the deal signed. for them, and it's the same thing again, where I had to prove that if I ever crashed the bike, how I could cover the cost. And I think when you're in the bubble of racing motorbikes, nothing ever matters, and the most important thing for me was just to get racing, and I think you make things happen. And I went round, I was so dedicated till I got up in the morning and went training and made sure I was as fit as I could be. Trained in the morning, trained at night. Whenever I wasn't training, I was either working or I was chasing after sponsorship, and I was so dedicated. But it turned out that wasn't to be that season. I was strong at the start of the season and won races. Went to the international races, was on the podium, and then I went to the Isle of Man TT, and on the last day of the Isle of Man TT, the Super Twin race was on the Super Twin lightweight race was on the Friday morning, and I believed I could win that race. And I started the race, and when I started, the pit lane limiter was stuck on, and I rode the whole way down the first probably mile with the pit lane limiter stuck on, probably panicking to try and get it turned off, and I eventually got it turned off, and I finished 4th in that race. So from hoping that I was going to win till finishing 4th just wasn't great for me, and I have no memory of the day, but I probably started the next race with so much hunger to try and have a good result and make amends for what had happened before. And I had my fastest ever lap around the Isle of Man on the first lap, and on the second lap I was on even faster sectors again and going stronger, but I crashed at the end of Crunkle Straight in the 13th milestone at about 175 miles per hour, so about 280 or 90 kilometres an hour, which wasn't ideal. I came off the bike, I went into the trees and took out a lot of trees. Then I come out from the trees and I get hit by another motorbike in the middle of the road, and then I get hit a signpost on the other side of the road. And
yeah. Get the ambulance here now. No.
There was a nurse who was an A&E nurse in the Isle of Man. She pulled me out of the hedge and resuscitated me. And then she gave me 3 bags of blood at the side of the road to try and keep me alive. And when the helicopter arrived, then they took me to the hospital in the Isle of Man, where I spent 2 or 3 hours trying to stabilise me. Then they airlifted me from there till Aintree in England. I spent 9 days in the critical care unit in Aintree, with having numerous operations and just trying to stabilise me. And then when they got me stabilised, they airlifted me to Belfast, and I spent 9 weeks in Belfast. I took a bad infection, and which meant I had to stay in a wee while longer. And I don't remember. So my injuries in total were: I have a list joint fracture in my foot, so my foot will need operated on in the future. I have my tibia and fibia were both broke on my leg and smashed, and there was 6 centimetres smashed out of both the tib and fib. I smashed my humerus, so I can't straighten my arm and I can't feel my fingers now. And I have a frontal lobe contusion to my head, which makes me struggle with memory problems, fatigue, and probably I just get in bad form. So I'm very up and down, and some days I have great days and some days I have bad days. And the biggest issue was, well, after the first 8 months, my arm actually re-broke. And originally they had 2 plates on my arm, and they removed the 2 plates. The 2 plates both broke, and they had to remove both plates and then refit a big thick plate in there to try and hold my arm together. And at that stage I couldn't straighten it much, and I was working on straightening it, but it got to the stage where I couldn't get any further, and there's probably something obstructing it in there, but it doesn't bother me too much. I live with it now, and I have no option. As far as my leg's concerned, I had a long road to recovery with the leg. I had I had 4 cages on for 4 years, and every time I took the cage off, the leg re-broke. And I remember going for the first year, and I got the cage off just about 13 months after my crash, and I had regrew 6 centimetres of bone back into the leg to try and they had cut all the what they thought was infected bone. They had cut out, and then regrew the 6 centimetres back, and where I got the cage off, and 2 days later the leg re-broke. So I was on with another cage, which was a very down point, because I thought that after a year after my crash and getting the cage off, that I was ready to go, and within 2 days the leg re-broke and I was back to square one. So I got a new cage on, that was on the second cage, went for another year, and after I got to the end of that year, the doctor in Belfast said that he didn't think it was healing, and I actually lost belief in the doctor in Belfast, and I actually changed and went to a doctor in Cambridge in London, who was amazing. He gave me his mobile number and I was able to talk to him, and I remember calling him one Sunday night and telling him about problems that I had, and him helping me through. It was just amazing to have that contactability and somebody that I could, if I was having an issue, I could talk to them about it rather than having to wait for an appointment to go and see the doctor, and it didn't suit. And so he fitted cage number 3 to the leg, and he cut some more bone out of the leg again, and went back again to regrowing the leg to try and get the more length back. And after another year, got the cage took off, and within a week the leg re-broke again for the 3rd time. So I was now on to cage number 4. Whenever I was regrowing the leg for cage number 4, I took an infection at the top of the leg, which immediately stopped me from the regrowth. So my leg is now about 1 centimetre shorter than what it was, or shorter than the other one. But as far as I know, it's not a massive deal, and there's probably more people with shorter legs than what you ever expect, and they make up the difference with insoles in the foot. But by that time, I had to go in for the infection, got it cleared up, and had about 6 months from 3.5 years in, and the doctor said to me that it didn't look like it was healing, the doctor in Cambridge, and I probably give up at that stage. So I went for all this time of always thinking that I would do whatever it takes to keep my leg and keep fighting, and at the end of that time I just gave up, and I asked the doctor to cut my leg off, and I told him that if he had to cut it off when the crash happened, I'd be doing the Paralympics now, and just to cut it off and let me get on with life. But he actually he said he would do it if I wanted to, but he would prefer that I give him some more time. And I suppose at this stage I'd give up, and I just didn't care either way. And I said to him, yeah, you can have all the time you want, but I believe that it's going to need cut off, it's not going to heal. And luckily enough, within a few months, the following x-ray showed that it was showing improvement, and eventually it healed. And I ended up getting the 4th cage off exactly 4 years to the date from the accident, and it's held ever since. And it was such a hard time in my life, and something that I believe that tough times don't last, but tough people do. And I feel it was a massive test for me, and I'm so proud of everything that I came through. I had so many down days in that time. There's days, and everybody suffers with these, there's days where you just feel down and depressed, and I think you have to believe that someday it will get better. Just if you keep pushing, you'll always get there. There's so many people, and they always tell me that, oh, you need to look for somebody, there's always people worse off than you. But I find that didn't help me whatsoever. Trying to have pity and feel that there's people worse than you didn't suit me. For me, trying to look to the future and see what I can possibly achieve was amazing. Like I climbed the mountain in Northern Ireland with the cage on my leg. I've always thought about what I can possibly achieve given my medical conditions now, and hopefully in the future I'll achieve lots more. And I would like to think that I can try and help somebody else with what they're struggling with. It would be an amazing feeling to feel like I've done now. I suppose I had so many people that were supporting me all through my accident. It was amazing that the amount of people I've had by my side and supporting me through everything in life, and hopefully with that support network I can achieve something else in the future. I don't know what the future holds for me. I'm now 8 years from my accident and I still don't know which path I will take. I'm still suffering a lot with injuries. I still can't straighten my arm, I can't feel my fingers. I struggle badly with my head, with the head injury, and my foot needs operated on in the future, where the Lisfranc fracture will need broken, straightened and fused together. And I've actually recently contacted about that, but the doctor said that I should wait as long as I possibly can before I get that operation. And God knows what the future will ever hold, but I know that what I've been through now has been difficult, but if I can possibly help somebody else, it would be an amazing feeling. So hopefully my story helps you today, and I'll put some videos on, and hopefully you can see pictures and videos of the crash. And thank you very much for listening.